Today, we're going to talk about space law. So back in ye old days, property owners had the rights to their land going up forever and ever in perpetuity. But then the airplane came around and smart people realized that you couldn't just go around asking every property owner for permission to fly through their airspace. So governments decided that they would own the air above a certain level. In general, governments decided that property owners own their land up to 500 feet above ground level, and then the air above that, going up infinitely, was to be owned and controlled by the government. This made life easier for airplanes, but then America invented space, and that made things a little more complicated. In most cases, satellites and spacecraft orbit around the Earth, so it would be a logistical nightmare to request permission to enter into the airspace of each nation in an orbit. Once again, smart people got together and decided that those air rights that countries had given themselves should end at a certain level. Different countries say different things, but all of them agree that somewhere between 19 miles above Earth, the altitude of the highest airplanes and balloons, and 99 miles above Earth, the altitude of the lowest orbiting satellites, a country's claim to sovereignty stops. So this begs the question, which laws apply in space? So let's say an astronaut commits a small crime while in space, like, doing a line while on a spacecraft. This isn't a huge crime against humanity, but they're gonna have to be punished. If the astronaut had those happy times while in the spacecraft of a specific country, it would be clear which country would prosecute. If it was in a Soyuz capsule, Russia would prosecute. If it was in a SpaceX capsule, the US would prosecute. Much like with boats, the spacecraft is considered to be an extension of the sovereignty of that country. But let's say Mr. Astronaut did his line while on the moon. Who would prosecute then? The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 says that no country can claim a section of space or a celestial body as their territory, so this means that no country's laws apply universally on the moon. Well, this is where the idea of extraterritorial jurisdiction comes into play. In almost every country, citizens are subject to the laws of their own country, even if they are outside of the country. This doesn't apply when they are in other countries, since the other country's laws trump the extraterritorial jurisdiction, but when they aren't in any country, these laws do apply. This means that two people in the exact same place can be subject to different laws. An 18-year-old British astronaut could technically drink on the moon, while an 18-year-old American astronaut could not. Just to make things a little bit more complicated, the rules are different on the International Space Station. The Space Station Agreement, the document that outlines the rules of the ISS, says that in most cases, extraterritorial jurisdiction applies. Each astronaut is subject to the laws of their own country. However, if, for example, an American astronaut, say, punches a French one out of frustration, France would be allowed to prosecute the American astronaut. The same rule applies with property. If a British astronaut smashes a Canadian astronaut's computer, Canada could prosecute the Brit. In addition, this agreement allows for the extradition of astronauts in all cases, regardless if the two countries have a normal extradition treaty. This is actually pretty important because Russia doesn't have an extradition treaty with the US. This means that Russia doesn't have to give up individuals who have committed a crime in which the US has the right to prosecute. In the case that a Russian commits a crime against an American on the ISS, however, Russia would be obliged to extradite that astronaut. Another situation to look at is what would happen if a baby was born in space. First off, this is a super hypothetical because it's unknown if it's even possible for a baby to be born in zero gravity. And if they were, their bones would be so brittle that they would crush under their own weight if they returned to gravity. It's unlikely that any country would allow for an astronaut to have a baby in space because that would be super unethical. But for the sake of argument, let's say there was a space baby. What nationality would that baby be? There is actually precedent for this question. 13 babies have been born in Antarctica, where there's a similar treaty that disallows sovereignty. While those babies were not born in their parents' countries, they took their parents' nationalities. The same policy applies in space. There are countries, however, that don't give citizenship to babies born outside of the country. So, in that case, the baby would take the citizenship of the country of the spacecraft they were born in. This is the same rule that applies when a baby is born on an airplane in flight. They take the nationality of their parents, and if that's not possible, they take the nationality of the country in which the aircraft is registered. And what happens if the baby is born on the moon or Mars where there is no sovereignty? Well, I don't know, man. What do I look like, a lawyer? But seriously, nobody really knows. This is just one of many flaws in current space law. Only 536 people have been to space, and all of them were highly trained and were representing their country. They just aren't the type of people to commit crimes. As commercial spaceflight and space tourism develop, all these laws will need to be made more clear to prevent future problems. Gone is the era when these laws can just be figured out when and if the time comes. In the near future, we could be seeing space mining as well, and that will require economic laws and environmental treaties. The coming decades will be a fascinating time as we watch not only the development of commercial space industries, but also as we lay out the legal and political groundwork needed for the opening of the final frontier.